At the beginning of the 20th century, Iran was a country caught between two worlds. On one hand, it possessed one of the oldest civilizations in human history, the land of ancient Persia, once home to vast empires that had stretched from the Mediterranean to Central Asia. On the other hand, by the early 1900s, Iran had become politically weak, economically underdeveloped, and deeply vulnerable to foreign influence. For over a century, the country had been ruled by the Qajar dynasty. By the 1920s, however, the Qajar state had lost much of its authority. Central power was fragile, regional tribes held significant autonomy, and foreign powers, particularly Russia and Britain, exercised enormous influence over Iranian affairs. Iran's strategic location made it extremely valuable. It sat between the Russian Empire to the north and British-controlled territories to the south, including India and the Persian Gulf. Both powers competed to dominate the region during what historians often call the Great Game. As a result, Iranian sovereignty was repeatedly compromised. Economic conditions were difficult. Infrastructure was minimal. Roads were poor, railways almost non-existent, and modern industry was virtually absent. Large portions of the population lived in rural areas under traditional systems of authority. Meanwhile, the central government struggled to collect taxes or enforce national laws outside major cities. This unstable environment created the conditions for a dramatic political transformation. In 1921, a military officer named Reza Khan entered Tehran at the head of a Cossack brigade. The march on the capital was not initially intended as a revolution, but rather as a coup designed to restore order and stabilize the state. Nevertheless, it marked the beginning of a new era in Iranian history. Reza Khan quickly emerged as the most powerful figure in the country. Within months, he became Minister of War and soon afterward Prime Minister. Over the next several years, he gradually consolidated power, weakening both tribal authorities and the declining Qajar monarchy. By 1925, the Iranian parliament formally deposed the last Qajar ruler and declared Reza Khan the new Shah of Iran. He took the name Reza Shah Pahlavi, establishing the Pahlavi dynasty that would rule the country for the next half-century. Reza Shah's vision was ambitious. He believed Iran could only survive as an independent state if it rapidly modernized. Inspired partly by the reforms of Mustafa Kemal Ataturk in Turkey, Reza Shah aimed to transform Iran from a fragmented traditional society into a centralized modern nation-state. His first priority was building a strong central government. Tribal autonomy was reduced through military campaigns that forced many tribes to settle permanently. A national army was created to replace regional militias. For the first time in centuries, the Iranian state possessed a unified military capable of enforcing authority across the country. Infrastructure development became another major focus. One of the most significant achievements of the period was the construction of the Trans-Iranian Railway. Completed in the late 1930s, it connected the Persian Gulf in the south to the Caspian Sea in the north, dramatically improving transportation across the country. Road networks expanded, and new industries began to emerge. Factories were built, cities grew, and economic activity increased. Education reform was also central to Reza Shah's modernization project. New secular schools were established, and universities were founded to train engineers, administrators, and professionals. For the first time, large numbers of Iranian students were sent abroad to study in Europe. These reforms were accompanied by significant cultural changes. Reza Shah promoted Iranian nationalism and emphasized the country's ancient Persian heritage. In 1935, the government requested that foreign countries use the name Iran instead of Persia in official communications. The change reflected a desire to reinforce national identity and emphasize Iran's historical continuity. At the same time, the Shah attempted to reduce the influence of traditional religious institutions. The state expanded control over education and the legal system, gradually replacing religious courts with secular ones. Perhaps the most controversial reforms involved dress codes and social customs. In 1936, the government introduced policies that discouraged traditional clothing and encouraged Western-style attire. In urban areas, women were even prohibited from wearing the veil in public. These reforms were intended to symbolize modernization, but they also provoked resistance among conservative religious communities. Despite these tensions, Reza Shah's policies did achieve significant results. By the late 1930s, Iran possessed a stronger central government, improved infrastructure, and the beginnings of a modern economy. However, the modernization process came at a cost. Reza Shah ruled as an authoritarian monarch. Political opposition was not tolerated. Newspapers were censored, and critics were often imprisoned or exiled. The Shah believed that rapid reform required strict control over society. Foreign policy presented another challenge. Reza Shah sought to reduce British and Russian influence, attempting to balance relationships with various international partners. During the 1930s, Iran developed closer economic ties with Germany. German engineers, technicians, and advisors worked on several industrial projects in the country. When World War II began in 1939, this relationship became a source of concern for the Allied powers. Britain and the Soviet Union feared that German influence in Iran could threaten vital oil supplies and transportation routes. In 1941, both countries launched a joint invasion of Iran. Facing overwhelming military pressure, Reza Shah was forced to abdicate the throne. He was sent into exile, and his son, a young prince named Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, became the new Shah of Iran. The transition marked the end of one phase of Iranian modernization and the beginning of another. The young Mohammad Reza Shah inherited a country that had been transformed by his father's reforms but remained deeply unstable. Iran was occupied by foreign armies, the political system was fragile, and new forces, including nationalism, socialism, and religious activism, were beginning to reshape the country's future. The next decades would determine whether the Pahlavi monarchy could survive these pressures, or whether the forces unleashed by modernization would ultimately bring the dynasty to an end. When Reza Shah abdicated the throne in September 1941, Iran entered a new and uncertain phase of its modern history. His son, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, inherited the crown at just 21 years old. The young Shah suddenly found himself responsible for a country that was not only politically fragile, but also under foreign military occupation. British and Soviet forces controlled large parts of Iran. Their presence had been justified by wartime strategy. Iran's geographic position made it an essential corridor for transporting supplies from the Allied powers to the Soviet Union. The route became known as the Persian Corridor, and millions of tons of military equipment passed through Iranian territory during World War II. For the young Shah, this situation created an immediate challenge. Unlike his father, who had ruled with iron authority, Mohammad Reza Shah initially possessed limited political power. The presence of foreign troops, combined with growing political movements inside the country, meant that the monarchy could no longer dominate Iranian politics in the same way. During the 1940s, Iran experienced a rare period of political openness. New political parties emerged. Newspapers criticized government policies more freely. Intellectual debates about nationalism, socialism, and democracy spread across the country. Labor unions organized workers in major cities. Among these new political forces was the Chud Party, a communist organization that gained support among industrial workers and intellectuals. The party advocated social reforms, workers' rights, and closer relations with the Soviet Union. At the same time, nationalist movements were also gaining strength. One of the most important figures to emerge during this period was Mohammad, a charismatic politician and longtime advocate of Iranian sovereignty. Mossadegh believed that Iran's greatest problem was foreign domination, particularly British control over the country's oil industry. Oil had been discovered in Iran in the early 20th century, and by the 1950s it had become one of the most valuable natural resources in the world. However, most of Iran's oil production was controlled by the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, a British corporation that extracted enormous profits while providing relatively little revenue to the Iranian government. Many Iranians saw this arrangement as a symbol of national humiliation. Mossadegh argued that Iran had the right to control its own natural resources. His message resonated deeply with a population increasingly frustrated by foreign influence and economic inequality. In 1951, the Iranian parliament appointed Mossadegh as prime minister. One of his first actions in office was the nationalization of Iran's oil industry. The decision triggered an international crisis. Britain responded with fury. The Anglo-Iranian Oil Company was one of the pillars of the British economy, and the loss of Iranian oil threatened both economic interests and global prestige. The British government imposed an economic embargo on Iranian oil exports. Tankers refused to transport Iranian crude, and international companies were pressured not to purchase it. The result was a severe economic downturn in Iran. The crisis also drew the attention of the United States. At first, American leaders attempted to mediate between Britain and Iran. However, the geopolitical context of the Cold War soon reshaped the situation. U.S. officials feared that economic instability in Iran could strengthen communist movements, particularly the Chud Party. By 1953, Washington had concluded that Mossadegh represented a political risk. Although Mossadegh himself was not a communist, American policymakers worried that his weakening government might open the door for Soviet influence. That year, the United States and Britain secretly organized a covert operation to remove Mossadegh from power. The plan became known as Operation Ajax. CIA agents worked with British intelligence services to coordinate political pressure, propaganda campaigns, and street demonstrations in Tehran. The goal was to create chaos that would justify intervention by the Iranian monarchy. At first, the operation nearly failed. Mossadegh discovered the plot and ordered the arrest of several military officers involved in the conspiracy. The Shah, fearing for his safety, fled the country and sought refuge abroad. For a moment, it appeared that the coup had collapsed, but events quickly changed. Pro-Shah demonstrators began appearing in the streets, some organized by intelligence operatives and others motivated by genuine political loyalties. Violent clashes broke out across Tehran. Military units loyal to the Shah eventually seized control of key government buildings. On August 19, 1953, Mossadegh's government fell. The prime minister was arrested, and the Shah returned to Iran shortly afterward. The coup had profound consequences for Iranian politics. For Mohammad Reza Shah, it marked a turning point. The monarchy, which had previously struggled to assert authority, now emerged as a dominant political force in the country. With strong support from the United States, the Shah began consolidating power. Political opposition was gradually suppressed. Parties that challenged the monarchy were banned or marginalized. The Shah also created a powerful intelligence organization known as SAVAK. SAVAK functioned as Iran's secret police. It monitored political activity, censored media, and suppressed dissent. Critics accused the organization of widespread surveillance, imprisonment, and torture of political opponents. At the same time, Iran's relationship with the United States grew closer. American economic aid flowed into the country. Military cooperation expanded. Iran became one of Washington's key allies in the Middle East, positioned as a strategic barrier against Soviet influence during the Cold War. Oil production resumed under a new international agreement that distributed profits more favorably to Iran, while still allowing Western companies to participate in extraction. As the 1950s came to an end, the Shah faced a difficult challenge. He had regained political control, but Iranian society remained divided. Many Iranians supported modernization and economic development. However, others were increasingly concerned about the concentration of power in the monarchy and the growing influence of Western culture. Religious leaders, in particular, criticized what they saw as the erosion of Islamic traditions. Meanwhile, economic growth created new social tensions. Rapid urbanization brought millions of rural migrants into expanding cities. Inequality between wealthy elites and poorer populations became more visible. The Shah believed that a bold reform program could resolve these tensions. In the early 1960s, he launched an ambitious series of policies that would transform Iranian society more dramatically than ever before. The program became known as the White Revolution. It promised land reform, education expansion, industrial development, and increased rights for women. The Shah presented these reforms as a peaceful revolution that would modernize Iran without violence. But as the reforms unfolded, they also provoked powerful opposition. Among the critics was a relatively unknown religious scholar named Ruhollah Khomeini. Within a few years, his voice would become one of the most influential in Iranian history. The next phase of the Pahlavi era would witness unprecedented modernization, but also the growing forces that would eventually challenge the monarchy itself. By the early 1960s, Mohammad Reza Shah believed that Iran stood at a crossroads. The monarchy had survived the political turmoil of the 1950s, including the dramatic overthrow of Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh. The Shah had reasserted authority with the support of powerful allies, particularly the United States. Yet beneath the surface, Iranian society remained unstable. Economic inequality persisted, rural areas were underdeveloped, and new political movements were emerging. The Shah concluded that gradual reforms were no longer enough. Iran, he believed, needed a rapid transformation, one that would modernize the country's economy, restructure its social system, and consolidate the power of the state. In 1963, he announced a sweeping reform program known as the White Revolution. The name was symbolic. The Shah described it as a revolution from above, a peaceful transformation intended to prevent the kind of violent upheaval that had occurred in other parts of the world. At its core, the White Revolution aimed to modernize Iran and integrate it into the global economy. One of the most important components was land reform. For centuries, much of Iran's agricultural land had been controlled by large landowners and traditional elites. Rural peasants often worked under systems that left them with little economic security. The Shah's reform program sought to break up these estates and redistribute land to peasants. Millions of farmers received plots of land for the first time. In theory, the policy aimed to create a new class of independent farmers loyal to the monarchy. In practice, the results were mixed. While some peasants benefited from land ownership, many lacked the resources necessary to make their farms productive. Agricultural infrastructure remained weak, and many small farmers struggled to compete in the modernizing economy. As a result, large numbers of rural migrants began moving to cities in search of work. Urban populations expanded rapidly. Tehran, which had been a relatively modest city early in the century, began transforming into a sprawling metropolis. Industrial zones grew, factories expanded, and construction reshaped the skyline. Another key component of the White Revolution was education reform. The Shah launched a nationwide literacy campaign. Thousands of young conscripts were assigned to serve in the literacy corps, traveling to rural villages to teach reading and writing. For the first time, large portions of the rural population gained access to basic education. The government also expanded universities and technical institutes, producing engineers, doctors, and administrators needed for a modern economy. Women's rights became another important element of the reform program. Women were granted the right to vote and run for public office. Educational opportunities expanded significantly, and women began entering professions that had previously been closed to them. These policies were presented by the Shah as symbols of national progress and modernization. However, they also provoked strong reaction from conservative religious leaders. Among the most vocal critics was Ruhollah Khomeini, a cleric who argued that the reforms threatened Iran's Islamic traditions and increased Western cultural influence. Khomeini openly criticized the monarchy, accusing the Shah of undermining religion and acting as a puppet of foreign powers. In June 1963, protests erupted in several Iranian cities following Khomeini's arrest. Demonstrations quickly turned violent, and security forces responded with force. The uprising was suppressed, but it revealed the depth of opposition within certain segments of society. Khomeini was eventually exiled from Iran. At the time, few observers predicted that the exiled cleric would one day return to lead a revolution. For the Shah, however, the events of 1963 reinforced the belief that political opposition had to be controlled. The state expanded the authority of Savak, the intelligence and security organization created earlier in the decade. Savak became one of the most powerful institutions in Iran. Its agents monitored political activists, journalists, students, and religious leaders. Critics accuse the organization of using intimidation, imprisonment, and torture to silence opposition. Supporters of the Shah argued that such measures were necessary to protect stability during a period of rapid modernization. During the late 1960s and early 1970s, Iran experienced extraordinary economic growth. Much of this expansion was fueled by oil revenues. Global demand for oil surged, and Iran possessed some of the largest reserves in the world. The government used oil income to finance massive infrastructure projects, industrial development, and military expansion. Highways, airports, dams, and factories appeared across the country. Tehran became one of the fastest-growing cities in the Middle East. Luxury hotels, modern office towers, and new cultural institutions symbolize the Shah's vision of a modern, prosperous Iran. The government also invested heavily in the military. By the mid-1970s, Iran possessed one of the most powerful armed forces in the region. Advanced weapon systems were purchased from the United States and Europe, transforming Iran into a major regional power. Internationally, the Shah sought to position Iran as a leader of the Persian Gulf. He presented the country as a stable ally of the West and a guardian of regional security during the Cold War. Yet beneath the surface of this apparent prosperity, tensions continued to grow. Rapid economic expansion created new inequalities. Urban elites benefited from the oil boom, while many workers struggled with rising living costs. The influx of rural migrants into cities placed enormous pressure on housing and social services. Meanwhile, political freedoms remained extremely limited. The Shah increasingly concentrated power in the monarchy. Political parties were restricted, and dissenting voices found little space in public life. In 1975, the Shah took an even more controversial step. He abolished the existing political system and created a single national party known as the Rostaki's Party. Membership in the party became effectively mandatory for many citizens. Those who refused were often viewed with suspicion or pressured to leave the country. The move was intended to unify the nation behind the monarchy. Instead, It intensified resentment among intellectuals, students, and political activists. Religious opposition also continued to grow. Although Khomeini remained in exile, his speeches and writings circulated widely inside Iran through underground networks. Cassette recordings of his sermons were secretly distributed in mosques and marketplaces. These messages criticized the Shah's policies, condemned Western influence, and called for resistance against what Khomeini described as tyranny. By the late 1970s, Iran had become a paradox. On one hand, it was wealthier and more modern than ever before. Industrial output had increased dramatically. Cities were expanding, and many Iranians enjoyed new opportunities for education and employment. On the other hand, political dissatisfaction was reaching a boiling point. Students protested government policies. Religious leaders condemned cultural changes. Intellectuals criticized the lack of political freedoms. Economic difficulties began to appear as global oil markets fluctuated, and the Shah himself faced growing personal challenges, including health problems that were kept secret from public. In 1978, a series of protests erupted across Iran. What began as demonstrations in a few cities quickly spread nationwide. Strikes paralyzed industries, including the crucial oil sector. Millions of Iranians took to the streets. For the first time in decades, the power of the Pahlavi monarchy appeared uncertain. The forces unleashed by modernization, economic change, and political repression were converging into a single movement. The monarchy that had ruled Iran for more than 50 years now faced the greatest challenge in its history. Within months, events would escalate into one of the most dramatic revolutions of the 20th century. And the Pahlavi era, once built on promises of modernization and stability, would come to a sudden and historic end. By the late 1970s, Iran appeared to be one of the most powerful countries in the Middle East. Its economy had grown rapidly during the oil boom of the previous decade. Modern highways, industrial complexes, universities, and military bases symbolize the Shah's vision of a strong and modern nation. Yet beneath the surface, Iranian society had become deeply divided. Rapid modernization had produced dramatic changes, but it had also created tension between different parts of society. Wealth was increasingly concentrated among political elites and urban professionals, while many ordinary citizens struggled with inflation and rising living costs. At the same time, political freedoms remained extremely limited. The Shah's government tolerated little opposition. Political parties were tightly controlled, newspapers were censored, and the security services monitored dissent across the country. Organizations such as SAVAK were widely feared, and many critics of the regime had been imprisoned or forced into exile. These conditions created a growing sense of frustration. Students, intellectuals, workers, and religious leaders all expressed dissatisfaction with the monarchy, though for different reasons. Some demanded democratic reforms and political freedom. Others opposed what they saw as the erosion of Islamic traditions and the increasing influence of Western culture in Iranian society. Among the most influential voices of opposition was the exiled cleric Ruhollah Khomeini. Although he had been forced to leave Iran in 1964, Khomeini continued to criticize the Shah's government from abroad. His speeches and writings circulated widely inside the country through underground networks. Religious institutions played an important role in spreading these messages. Mosques served as centers of communication and organization. Sermons condemned corruption, inequality, and perceived moral decline of society. Khomeini's supporters argued that Iran's problems were rooted not only in political oppression, but also in the abandonment of Islamic values. In January 1978, tensions erupted into open conflict. A government-controlled newspaper published an article attacking Khomeini and questioning his religious authority. The article angered many religious students and clerics in the city of Qom, one of Iran's most important centers of Islamic learning. Protests broke out almost immediately. Security forces attempted to suppress the demonstrations, but violence only fueled further anger. News of the clashes spread across the country, inspiring protests in other cities. What followed was a cycle of demonstrations and repression. According to Shiite tradition, mourning ceremonies are held 40 days after the death of individuals killed in violent events. Each round of protest produced new casualties, and each 40-day mourning period triggered further demonstrations. By mid-1978, the movement had grown dramatically. Workers joined the protests, including employees in Iran's vital oil industry. Strikes began to disrupt the economy and weaken the government's ability to function. Universities became centers of activism. Millions of people began participating in demonstrations across major cities. The Shah's government responded with a mixture of concessions and repression. At times, the Shah promised political reforms and attempted to appoint new officials who might calm the situation. At other moments, security forces used violence to disperse crowds. One of the most significant turning points occurred in September 1978. During a massive protest in Tehran, thousands of demonstrators gathered in Jala Square. The government declared martial law and ordered the crowd to disperse. When protesters refused, soldiers opened fire. The event became known as Black Friday. The exact number of casualties remains disputed, but the violence shocked the nation. For many Iranians, the incident destroyed any remaining legitimacy the monarchy possessed. From that moment onward, compromise became increasingly difficult. The revolutionary movement expanded rapidly. In October 1978, Ruhollah Khomeini moved from Iraq to France after being pressured to leave by the Iraqi government. From exile near Paris, he gained unprecedented access to international media. Journalists from around the world traveled to interview him. Through radio broadcasts, recorded speeches, and media coverage, Khomeini's messages reached millions of Iranians. He called for the complete overthrow of the monarchy. Inside Iran, protests continued to grow. Mass demonstrations filled the streets of Tehran, Isfahan, Shiraz, and other cities. Workers shut down key industries, including the oil sector that provided most of the country's revenue. The government was gradually losing control. Meanwhile, the Shah's personal situation was deteriorating. Unknown to the public at the time, Mohammad Reza Shah had been suffering from cancer for several years. His illness weakened his ability to respond decisively to the crisis. International support for the monarchy also began to fade. Although the United States had long supported the Shah as a strategic ally during the Cold War, American officials became increasingly uncertain about the future of his government. By early 1979, the political situation had reached a breaking point. On January 16, 1979, Mohammad Reza Shah left Iran. Officially, his departure was described as a temporary vacation. In reality, it marked the end of the Pahlavi monarchy. Millions of Iranians celebrated in the streets. 2 weeks later, on February 1st, 1979, Ruhollah Khomeini returned to Iran after more than 14 years in exile. His arrival in Tehran was one of the most dramatic moments in modern Iranian history. Huge crowds gathered to welcome him. Estimates suggest that several million people filled the streets of the capital as his A-plane landed. Within days, revolutionary forces moved quickly to dismantle the remaining institutions of the monarchy. Military units began declaring neutrality or joining the revolution. Government ministries fell under revolutionary control. On February 11, 1979, the Iranian armed forces officially announced their neutrality in the conflict. The monarchy had collapsed. Soon afterward, a national referendum was held to determine the future political system. The result was overwhelming. Iran was officially declared an Islamic republic. The revolution had ended more than 2,000 years of monarchical rule in Iran. A new political order emerged, based on the principle of Islamic governance under the leadership of religious authorities. For supporters of the revolution, the events of 1979 represented liberation from dictatorship and foreign influence. For others, the revolution marked the end of a period of modernization and global integration that had begun under the Pahlavi dynasty. Either way, the transformation was profound. The Pahlavi era, which had begun with Reza Shah's rise to power in 1925, had lasted just over half a century. During that time, Iran had undergone enormous change. Railways and universities had been built. Cities had expanded dramatically. Industry had developed, and the country had become one of the major oil producers in the world. But the rapid pace of modernization, combined with political repression and cultural conflict, had ultimately produced a revolutionary backlash. The Iranian Revolution of 1979 reshaped not only Iran, but the entire Middle East. It altered the balance of power in the region, influenced global energy politics, and created a political system that continues to shape international relations today. The fall of the Pahlavi dynasty was therefore not simply the end of monarchy. It was the beginning of a new chapter in Iranian history, one whose consequences continue to unfold in the modern world.